Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks.
Just wait. Thank you, we're on air, and just a reminder to everybody that we are on air, so please keep your mobiles switched off if you can and not vibrating around, because it does interfere with the recording. Welcome those that may be listening, and welcome to the councillors and everybody that's in the room next door as well. Thanks for being here, and please be seated. Thank you. Just in opening the meeting, we have one apology from Councillor Stodnicek. Declaration of interest. Any declaration of interest from councillors? No. Somebody move the minutes of the meeting held the 1st of July. Move Councillor Harris, seconded Deputy Mayor. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. No deputations, no petitions. We have a community report from Miss Erin Duffy, I believe, is here from Just Like Jack.
Good afternoon. Did you think it's funny? Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the opportunity to come in and say hello this afternoon and give you a brief update about Just Like Jack. If Jack disappears in a minute, please forgive him. He's known for interjecting quite a bit, so when someone else is speaking.
No, not Jack.
If you don't know Jack, he is the inspiration behind our not-for-profit Just Like Jack Incorporated. Jack was born, we're 15 now, aren't you? Yep. He was born in 2006, and not long after he was born, my husband and I realised that he had what we call diffabilities, so he's very different to other people. Yes. And it changed our lives. At the time, we were army officers, didn't really know people, I guess, with diffabilities, and so we had to change our focus. Excuse me if I get emotional, I always do want to talk about these things. So we actually we were a little bit lost, threw ourselves into an adventure which was called Kayak Jack back then. My husband Chris kayaked down the east coast of Tasmania. Jack got in the kayak every day for an hour at least, and we raised money at the time for St Giles. I think we raised about $70,000, but that wasn't our main focus. It was about awareness, getting people to know people like Jack. Yes. And after that, again, I think it just helped us move through the period we were working through. We went on to running Jack. So they started doing some marathons. My husband pushed Jack through quite a few marathons, Hobart, Melbourne, Ross, Launceston, and after that it was the overland track. So in 2016, Jack went across the overland track in 6 days with 16 support members. Chris did carry him on his back, and the rest of us just helped get everything else across. And those of you that know Rachel Williams, she did a documentary of that trek. That's on YouTube if you want to have a look. The reason I'm telling you all this, and there is a reason, is one, because we're very proud of Jack, but two, because it led us to realise, after doing Point to Pinnacle after that there are a lot of people out there with disabilities that aren't as lucky as Jack. He's got good support, we've got good support, they don't. And so just like Jack was born. Yeah? In 2017, Just Like Jack became a not-for-profit, and we started concentrating on letting other kids with disabilities and their families have adventures. So we sort of started off, where 5 years later we're still going. We are based on fundraising, we're based on volunteers. We've done a range of things, more marathons, Point to Pinnacle several times, Burnie, Ross, Launceston, even Gold Coast. We've actually now branched out into non-running events as well. During COVID, we sent a lot of adventure packs to kids so they could do fun things at home, bowling passes when restrictions lifted. We've also had movie days, and only recently a helicopter day as well. So quite a few kids in the north got to go for a helicopter flight. One of the things though, and you're all part of this, that we're very, very proud of is the carousel at Royal Park. That carousel is magnificent, and if we do nothing else, that's it for us. Some of our families, their adventures are getting out of the house and going to the park. To be able to go to the park and get on a piece of equipment is life-changing for some people. We had recently all of our parents, or not all of them, sorry, a section of our parents come in and tell us what they wanted in the future. You've been good so far. They told us what they wanted from Just Like Jack and adventures in the future, and it's very exciting. We're going to keep doing running events. We're going to do Ross this year because everyone can get to that. We're going to do Point to Point, Beauty Point to Pinnacle. And we're also going to start doing things like helicopters that we've already done, more movie days that we've done in the past as well. We're also looking at barbecues because the families told us they want a sense of community, which sometimes they do feel isolated. One of the other things we're very excited about is a Liberty Swing. I'm not sure if any of you have seen one. It's basically a big swing that you can put someone in a wheelchair in, and they can swing like anybody else. It also has a key that you can use anywhere else around Australia, in the same kind of equipment, and we've done that before in Queensland. It's a really good tourist thing as well. So I guess to finish off, for us as parents, and knowing the parents in our not-for-profit incorporation, it's all about adventures, yes, but it's that sense of belonging, that sense of community, and that's exactly what I think all of you are about as well. That's what the council is for as well. So we look forward to exciting times, adventures, plans and ideas along with all of you. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Erin. Thank you, Erin, for the work you do, and for Chris as well. Pass on our thanks to Chris, and also the swing. I have had a meeting regarding that, and we are still going to work on that, and hopefully in the next few months we can get further into that. So
Absolutely.
Looking forward to a location for that.
Thank you for your support.
Cheers. Thank you. So we have public questions on notice that are there. Now we have public questions without notice. And just a reminder, if you're giving a question, you do need to state your name and address. And that's not just for us in here, it's also for those that are listening online. So I appreciate if you could state your name and address, please.
Hello again. My name's Sue Rafferty and I live at 25 Bill Grove in Mowbray. I've got 3 questions today. Currently there's a proposal for boardwalks and art installations on the mud of the Tamar River, which is in a poor condition to say the least. I've been looking and currently we have TEMT, which is the Tamar Estuary Management Task Force. We have NRMN, which is the Natural Resources Management North. We have TEER, the Tamar Estuary and Esk Rivers. We have RHAP, the River Health Action Plan. We have EHAP, Ecosystem Health Assessment Program, and we have GHAP, which I can't work out for the life of me, along with TAG, the Tamar Action Group, Fix the Mud, and Friends of the Upper Tamar, along with concerned residents. The river's a mess, I think we'd all agree.
Could you get to a question, please?
Shortly.
Thank you.
I'd like to finish. The question is not far away. The river's a mess. The silt being taken from Inveresk is currently being piled up in levees below Vermont Road, ready to float down in the next flood event. And for all the above groups, nothing is actually happening on a holistic scale. In the 1980s, there was a government initiative called Cradle to Coast to protect waterways from grazing activities. What happened to that? It appears that that is what's happening now. There are many things that can be done to improve the condition of the Launceston Basin, but artworks and boardworks are certainly putting the cart before the horse. So my question is, what is the name of the new independent body announced by Peter Gutwin, which will guide the development and health of the North Esk, South Esk and Tamar rivers, and what will their statutory responsibilities be?
Yeah, well, that's obviously a question for Peter Gutwin, as you just said yourself. But from our point of view, there isn't a name yet for that committee. And just to correct you on some of the information you did say, currently there's $130 million committed to the Tamar estuary. 10 million of that has started to be spent. There's a lot more of that's going to be rolled out in the next couple of years, and that will help to not just fix the mud, but to fix the river overall and what is coming into the river. So there's a whole lot of plans on that, and there's probably more details on our website. I'd say if you want to get into the detail of it all.
I haven't found any detail on the website.
Isn't there anything there?
I'd like some information on that.
Well, Tempt website it'll be, the Tempt website. Have a look at that.
I'll go back into Tempt.
Thank you.
All right, number 2. The Invermay Master Plan of 2019-2020 acknowledges that new developments in the Invermay area will place increased pressure on the state and local road networks. Point 3 in this document mentions the need to minimise traffic impact on the local Invermay road network. It's too late for the UTAS car park. My question is, would Council follow its own document's advice from the Invermay Master Plan and prevent larger scaled vehicles with their associated noxious activity from being positioned in Churchill Park Drive?
Yeah, I'll take that on notice and we'll give you an answer to the next council meeting.
And last but not least, good old Rampat. All roads lead back to Rampat, don't they? Whose sole responsibility was to place conditions so the site could proceed. When I read the responses to my questions, along comes Rampat as a means of avoiding responsibility. Council has a responsibility foremost toward the residents of Invermay, who have not given social licence to a proceeding on the current site. Suitable alternate sites exist on high ground with well-sealed roads, infrastructure and away from residential areas. It appears that this council is content to be mediocre when there is an opportunity to enhance the precinct between the university, Churchill Park and Heritage Forest. My question, would council consider buying back the site from Marching Ants, which apparently cost $2.3 million, to develop a market precinct in this area? The food vans from High Street, a new indoor-outdoor market, rehousing the people who lost their livelihood from Esk Market. It's only limited by imagination. A performing arts space, Mona even. And that's it from me today. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. The answer is no. But other councillors can consider that, and if a motion comes back to us, we'll consider it at the time about buying that property. That was a question, I believe. Any other questions from the public? Thank you. So under the provisions of the Land Use Planning... Oh, thank you. Under the provisions of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act of 1993, Council acts as a planning authority in regard to the items included under Addendum Item 9, Planning Authority. So we do have some number of speakers for 9.1. Just a reminder to speakers, you have 2 minutes, and at the end of that you'll hear that sound that we just heard a minute ago to remind you that your 2 minutes are up. So the first speaker is Terrell Riley Gibson. Terrell Riley Gibson.
Hello. I'm very concerned about whatever the number is. I live at 27 Elizabeth Street, and without seeing photographs of it, you haven't really got much of an idea of how that impacts upon me. The roof line that is there, my understanding is that the new roof line is to follow along with the 3 steps, and I don't believe you've got the photographs, but the pop-top windows that are there looking directly at my major picture window in my house. When I bought that house, it never occurred to me that I would be built out by such a large building, proposed building. So privacy issues are one of the issues I have, but also my loss of view. So if you were to see the photograph, you would realise that it's much more pervasive than you can see, because on the plans it didn't show that. It only showed the corner and the next house, and my house is significantly higher than those 2 houses, and I see that from my garden as well. I'm also concerned about the heritage changes to the existing building, which I'm sure others will talk about. The streetscape doesn't belong to me only as a resident, it belongs to everybody and anybody who chooses to visit or walk up and down the street. The streetscape would change significantly with this building. There's already a very extreme noise pollution from the 3 steps, and this can only be magnified by increasing the capacity of that. Parking has been very well covered. However, I'm not satisfied that that is in fact going to be a total fait accompli. That parking situation could change at any time. If the church decided they want to sell that land or reuse it in another way, then that parking is gone. And I don't believe that people who are going to stay at the hotel are going to want to come and stay at any of the other parking spots around town, and they aren't going to use a public bus because they're just not. But my major issue really is that there was no lack of consultation. I did offer opportunity for people to come into my house and see it. That was ignored or said no. And to be honest with you, that's the only way anybody can really get an idea. You need to see it through my eyes, not through what you've all been told. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, councillors. My name is James Emerson Armstrong. I'm from 18 Stone Street, and I wish to provide a statement on behalf of the architect and the applicant, the owner of the Hotel Colonial. David Denman and Associates and the owner have spent considerable time and effort in developing a design that responds appropriately to the local heritage context and satisfies the brief requirements to provide for continued sustainability of this long-standing Launceston hotel business. The owner has spent a number of years planning the further development of this site and has actively pursued a solution that responds appropriately to the local historic context. The design was developed and refined through discussions with the nominated Heritage Tasmania representatives and has been revised in accordance with the conditions of the heritage decision and further feedback received from the public during the advertised period. Although there are no height limits imposed under the planning scheme, the design approach has been to limit the height and scale of the building to match the adjoining heritage buildings. The proposed height is compatible with the residential development of the area and is also in accordance with the planning controls for residential development. For example, a row of terrace houses with a height of 9 metres would be accepted. By comparison, the ridge height of 3 steps on George is approximately 8.4 metres. The proposed design aligns precisely with the ridge of 3 steps on George. The gable roof design has been selected specifically to be in keeping with the surrounding heritage listed buildings in order to retain context. The site has been earmarked for rezoning to urban mixed use in the next round of amendments to the planning scheme. And the development is also in keeping with the future planning strategies of the Launceston City Council under this rezoning. The proposed on-site parking numbers meet the requirements for the Parking and Sustainable Transport Code. We trust the time and effort applied to this proposal in order to satisfy the various and complex aspects of the codes, regulations, compliance, construction, functional operation, and the local heritage context has been appreciated for its true value. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Eric Ratcliffe.
Mr Mayor and Alderman, I occupy 153, 155 George Street, Albion House, and as you may have noticed, we've recently spent a lot of money refurbishing the exterior, which was long overdue, but refurbishing our exterior is essentially a gift to the community. It doesn't make a great deal of difference to us. I have no objection to the footprint of the proposed development. I have no objection to its overall height. My concerns are with its aspect and appearance as published. First of all, the published colour scheme is extremely fashionable at the moment, but I imagine it won't be for much longer. It's certainly out of keeping, and around the town there are a number of other examples of similar colour schemes being inserted into suburban spaces, and their incongruity is very apparent, but time will deal with that. The form of the building is the matter of concern. The token gable applied to what is basically a square box is not acceptable. An honest form would be necessary to harmonise with the buildings on the other three corners. All of them have fairly dominant roof forms, and the adjacent Colonial Motor Inn buildings with the gabled roofs also have very dominant roof forms. The gable is merely a decorative device attached to a box. I was also noting that one thing that's not contextual is the form of the windows on the George Street side. Thank you. So our concern is the form, the roof form, but we're not particularly concerned, and I think the building on that corner would actually have the capacity to enhance the corner rather than be a detriment to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Ratcliffe.
Hello, Mayor and Councillors. I also live with my father, Dr Ratcliffe, at the corner of George and Elizabeth Streets. There is a lot of, I guess you'd say, heritage integrity. It's a beautiful spot, and I believe if anything is going to replace that spot, it's not a big ugly black box which is actually concealing the heritage values of the rest of the hotel. Also, parking is very boring, but it's a big consideration for everyone who lives in the area. There's a lot of heritage houses that do not come with parking. I'm always continually floating around looking for a park, because we only have one park for two houses. The hotel users will absolutely go for the closest parks available. That is just no doubt. And also with the history of the church, selling off property, I don't think that leasing parks from then is a very secure proposition. So, thank you. Also, just the form of the building, that horrible, or I think horrible, blank wall facing Elizabeth Street could do well with some windows to reflect perhaps what is going on.
Thank you. That's all the speakers I have. Are there any others?
Hello, my name is Carol Westmore. I live at 22 Elizabeth Street, opposite the proposed development. The house I live in was originally built to add to the Launceston Grammar School, which is in now the site of the Colonial. It was the site of the headmaster's house. I object to the view of this building. It is From my point of view, when I look at it, it's much higher than the existing buildings. The access from a parking point of view is difficult. I already have difficulty getting in my driveway because of people accessing the hotel and delivery trucks and so on parking across my driveway. I think with 34 units proposed, there should be additional parking spaces allowed. The roof line of the building is not in keeping with the existing heritage-listed streetscape. There is a gable added, but then there are inappropriate pop-top windows popped on the front facade. It is not in keeping with either modern architecture or the existing architecture. I think there are ways of sensitively building and adding to heritage-listed neighbourhoods, of which that whole city block is one, but this proposed development is not one of those. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all the speakers. I take it there's no others coming. Thank you. So I did that under that, yeah. So we're now at 9.1. Is somebody happy to move a motion for 9.1? Councillor Mackenzie, is there a seconder? Councillor Harris. Wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, Mayor, and I thank all of the people who have spoken today, and I thank them for all their representations in regards to it. We sit here as a planning scheme looking at matters in relation to the planning scheme, and where there's reference to the Heritage Council or Heritage Matters, they are further referred to the Heritage Council of Tasmania. And our Heritage Planning Officer has also made comments in relation to the development. A number of the representors made reference to the colour schemes and how, and the fabric and the materials in relation to the build. Our Heritage Officer and Heritage Tasmania have reviewed the building and basically believe, and I think as Dr Ratcliffe said, the actual form and size of the actual building fits within the heritage precinct as appropriate. They found the materials that were used in the original design didn't fit the heritage thing, and as a consequence of that, our officers have made a number of conditions in relation to the way that the building is constructed and the materials that it's made of. As a consequence of that, it's then gone through the planning procedures as normal, and our officers have recommended for approval of that, subject to the conditions imposed by the Heritage Council and endorsed by a Heritage Planning Officer. As most people know, I chair the Heritage Advisory Committee in the Council, and therefore matters of heritage are of significant importance to me as well. And unfortunately, when you have something that's modern, designed to fit in and around something that's a heritage list, it's always a challenge to make that fit. This was a vacant block of land, and as I understand, has always been a vacant block of land. So I understand the concepts or the comments made by those that are now having their view affected by the construction in front of it. But as we find everyone that comes to this council, where the view is as an issue, unfortunately it's not something that's prescribed in the planning scheme. So therefore we can't take into account the fact that somebody's view is impacted by a development aspect. In relation to the way the property references to the streetscape, if you look around and you look across the road, most of the houses are actually built right up to the streetscape and right on the front of the streetscape. It does fit in with the line of the building, which is the Rosie's Tavern or 3 Steps on George, so it does run through there. I take the comments in regards to the gable, but looking down the street it actually looks to fit in with the gable structure of the Colonial Hotel and designed to do so. I take the issue that Dr Ratcliffe makes and say it's a box which has got a gable which is planted on the front of it, but the reality of it is, if you look at it, the roof line is designed in a gable structure. In relation to the dormer windows that sit through on the additional storey which poke out of the roof, I understand that there is certainly under condition a desire to actually change the form of the original structure in relation to that, and I do note the drawings that were put in the representation by Dr Ratcliffe, and I would hope that once those are formed at, that some of those things are looked at and put into place. But the reality of it is, when we get down to the nub of it, does it meet the planning scheme? And given the issues associated with the heritage, which have been thoroughly investigated and reported on by the Heritage Council of Tasmania and our Heritage Office Planner, where they've viewed, with the conditions they put in place, that it meets the heritage requirements of the site. Our officers have then determined, through the process of looking at the other matters of the planning scheme that need to be attended to, including parking, and conditioned parking on the basis that, yes, there are leased land blocks from the church, which I think has a 20-year lease on it. The reality of it is it's conditioned that, provided they have that number of car parks available, that it meets the requirements of the planning scheme. As a consequence of that, today I'll be supporting the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Mackenzie, for taking most of my speaking points. Looking at the development, as he said, if you're in one of those houses on George Street or Elizabeth Street that is directly opposite, you have 100% of your view changed by having such a building built in front of you. However, for those of us who don't live directly opposite, the view has been modified by a building that can never be 150 years old, and so it has to look in its own sense as a building that reflects the architecture that's there but represents a modern building. And the original sketches and colour schemes of the monument and greys certainly did stand out like a sore thumb. Thankfully, the Heritage Commission has come in and said we need to see more browns and muted earthy tones, and the subsequent reissue of plans or diagrams showing the proposed building in much more brown and brown bricks certainly looks a lot better, and certainly, to my point of view, makes it a more suitable building for this site. On the issue of the gables, I did find when we're on site today that this actually provides a nice bookend. The original street-fronted cottage right down nearest the church provides one bookend of the site. Then you have the setback to the main building that's been there for 150 years, and now you have a new building being built which bookends and replicates those gables. So I think in weighing it up from a planning perspective, it meets the guidelines. I also had great concerns about the number of car parks at 108 units on site or whatever it was, and only 65 odd car parks. I also felt that that seemed to be a bit short of the required number. However, having had the planning process explained to me of the number of beds and one car for every 4 beds, it does seem to meet the minimum requirement. And I do understand the concerns of local residents who might find that guests at the hotel might be parking outside their homes, but like most of this stuff, the guests will be in and out in a day or two, and so it will be a continual change, and there'll be, I'm sure, as there is at the moment, many busloads of tourists that come to this particular hotel, and thankfully they don't bring their cars with them, they come on the bus, and so therefore the problems may not be as bad as you imagine. So at the end of the day, does it meet the planning scheme? It does. I'm very glad to see the Heritage Commission doing their job and making suggested changes, and the developer has taken those on board, and it is a local developer, which is good to see. People prepared to invest in our city, so I'll be supporting it today.
Thank you. Councillor Soward.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and I just want to lend my voice to thanking all of those who came and spoke to us today, and as well as those that have contacted us with their thoughts on this development. Like many around this table and in this room, I'm sure I walk the area, around that area often, and know it well, and certainly empathise with the concerns that residents have raised and the impact that this will have on them. A couple of points, Mr Mayor, as I often do with matters like this. I start, when I read the council report, with the representations to add to my understanding of the issues that have been raised through the process, and the officer's response to those. Some of those have been touched on by Councillor Mackenzie and Councillor Harris, but a couple of things I wanted to highlight. The concerns that were raised with me, and we did hear come through the passionate remarks of the speakers today, were around heritage. And as has been made, the point, we've obviously got the heritage folk, the heritage planner involved, and there have indeed been some changes to to some things and some ongoing monitoring of that. So I'm not sure if all who contacted us or spoke were aware of that, but that is very, very clear in the council agenda, starting on page 39 and continuing on for some pages, Mr Mayor. There a number of issues that were raised with heritage impact. There's some commentary around that does attempt to deal with that in a satisfactory manner in line with those conditions. The other thing too, Mr Mayor, that I will highlight when one looks through the matters raised through the representations is they're often a very, very useful point to help people understand what this is all about. I do note one of the points that was raised, and an important one, Mr Mayor, was around the water and sewerage pipes in Launceston being old, which they are. But that, as it is very clearly spelled out there, is the responsibility of Taswater. So you've got an external body, nothing to do with council, they've had a look at this and they've actually said, and I'm quoting there, Taswater is satisfied that the proposal will not cause their systems to fail. Now, not that I would ever want to speak on behalf of Taswater, but I'm sure they've done their due diligence and they wouldn't be making statements like that, Mr Mayor, if they indeed felt that their system would fail. Again, working through the detail and the issues raised there, something that I find quite interesting is that often when hotels, and in recent times, even after COVID, before COVID, when there's been any attempt to alter hotel rooms, people will say things like occupancy. We have some representations that say there'll be this massive occupancy that causes all problems, and others will say, well, why would you build it? Because no one can come and stay here. So interesting that those are raised as issues, but they are not, as quite rightly pointed out, they're planning considerations. So I think it's really, really important to identify those things, and I'm glad that people have raised them. The other one that I do find interesting, which again is addressed, Mr Mayor, within the concerns raised by representatives, comes around things like, if I could broadly call it, entertainment noise from the establishment there. Again, as we all are, I'm sure, familiar with that precinct, and we know that noise does carry great distances. There are other establishments within that area that are hotels or pubs or clubs or whatever you want to call them. So I'm interested that that's raised as an issue when indeed the 3 Steps on George complex, if I call it that, has been there for a significant amount of time, and there are other pubs and venues nearby. The other thing, Mr Mayor, and that's where I'm going to finish my remarks today, I've dealt with the things raised in the representations. A point that needs to be made really, really clearly, and I'm hoping that those who have made representations for or against do understand, and that is that when we sit as a planning authority, and you always at the start of every planning part of the meeting read out the terms that under the Land Use and Planning Approvals Act, that's what we're sitting under, not under what we feel like doing at the time around the table or what's a good idea. So we're following the law. If we today said, when we look at this application...
Your time's up. Do you need an extension?
Yes, please.
Move Deputy Mayor, seconded Councillor Cox. All those in favour for an extension of 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. When we look at this, the detail of this particular application today, as is our job to do so, when we go through it and we see the word complies, relies on performance criteria, complies, we have in essence in front of us a planning application that complies with the scheme. If we said, and notwithstanding the passion and the real issues for the residents, if we said, you know what, this complies, but we're going to say no, we're going to refuse it. What would happen at ratepayers' expense is this would end up in the Resource Management and Appeals Tribunal, and one would imagine, not that one would put themselves in the chair of someone at that decision-making body, that they would then approve it because it does comply with the scheme. We would have cost the ratepayers of this city a significant amount of money. And the ratepayers could quite rightly say, what on earth are you doing? What on earth are you doing refusing a compliant application? and wasting $50,000, $60,000 of your ratepayers' money. Fair point. Because again, we get criticised all of the time for wasting money. We get criticised all the time for spending money we shouldn't be spending. Sometimes unfairly, I believe. But anyway, that's an aside. So in front of us, Mr Mayor, we have an application that complies with the scheme. What that means is, my understanding of the Land Use and Planning Approvals Act is, we need to approve it. We mightn't necessarily like the fact that it is a relatively new thing. I think, as Councillor Mackenzie said, it's going to be a big change to that area. Big change. Does it comply with the law? Yes, it does. So I'll conclude my remarks there, Mr Mayor. I do understand the concerns people have that have lived in that area for a lot of years, confronted with something that is new and large and different to what's there at the moment. But as I said, when we sit as a planning authority, we do need to follow the rules of the Land Use and Planning Approvals Act. Thank you.
Thank you. Question, Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor. I'll start, please, in the area of parking. With regard to parking, should indeed we be conditioning to reference the fact that 29 of the total required 63 parking spaces are part of a lease arrangement, and indeed what safety net is provided to residents, to council, if indeed that lease is no longer possible?
Thank you. Richard, you answer that? Duncan? No? Richard?
The applicant has applied on the basis that some of the car parks are on adjacent leased land. There's a condition of approval which requires a number of car spaces to be provided. Should the car spaces be unable to be provided at some point in the future, there would be a number of options at that point that could be considered. So an application for further dispensation could be made, for example, or some rooms could be closed potentially, or the planning scheme may have changed at that point. So the condition doesn't specify what may happen. It specifies the number of car spaces that are required to be maintained. If the condition actually requires the applicant to notify the council if that's not possible, and then ultimately it could be enforcement, it could be a further dispensation, it could be a lease on another part of another piece of ground. There would be a number of options that might be acceptable at that point. But it's too difficult to specify them all in a condition.
Thank you. My next question, with regard to the Tasmanian Heritage Council's advice, says that the exterior wall surfaces that are proposed to be precast concrete and pressed metal cladding must be modified, as we've heard, or substituted with a different material to achieve an articulated textured finish that is in harmony with the material character and adjacent heritage buildings. Further, it says on page 30, at the time of writing, some revised plans have been received. However, there has been no advice from the Tasmanian Heritage Commission in regard to these. The Tasmanian Heritage Commission advice referenced suggestions, for example, that the roof cutouts to the east, those on George Street and west elevations, should be articulated by being omitted, and also that adjustments could be made to the gable roof end profiles. They seem to be things that we've heard and seen through the written and verbal representations. In the submitted plans or revised plans that we've seen thus far, admittedly they have not yet gone, presumably, or been endorsed by the Heritage Commission, have we seen those things that representors have suggested would please them and make the situation better? Have we seen evidence of those things in the submitted draft plans?
Duncan.
Thank you very much. The indicative plans that we've received so far in regard to the changes required by the Heritage Council have provided some changes to the dormer windows to articulate them more as separate dormer windows rather than one large structure. Now, whether or not that will be sufficient to meet the expectations of the Heritage Council or indeed of some of the representors, I can't comment at this stage, but it's certainly a good first step. With regard to the gable, the form of the gable is largely the same, although it now gives the impression of a much larger window opening, if you will, at the top of it. And of course, overall that wall will change because it now has a much larger expanse of brickwork, and the large floral carving that was in the first proposal is no longer there.
Thank you.
Mayor, a subsequent question, if I may, and thank you for that advice. It's appreciated. Given that specific advice has been received there and is listed in the agenda that references the gabed form, what, and based on your experience and understanding of the THC, what should representors come to expect in terms of their necessity to comply with the suggested advice with regard to the gabed form? Is that something that representors and us as members of the authority could assume will need to be met in order to be passed by THC?
Duncan.
Thank you. A very difficult concept. There is no certainty of what the THC will actually accept in regard to a change of that. I mean, their conditions have clearly required some alteration to its form and presentation. I think ultimately we can expect something vaguely similar to what's there. There's still going to be a gable on that end. I can't imagine that we're going to come back with a roofline that doesn't incorporate that. So the extent to what changes might be made to that to satisfy the THC, I think the designers will consult directly with the THC on that one.
Thank you. Is that it? Thank you. Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you, Mayor. And look, I'd just like to add a few words. I don't want to go over what's already been said by previous councillors. I'd just like to say I do feel empathy, especially for the two representors who feel their amenity is going to be affected by this development. But one thing that we know for absolutely sure is that change is coming in Launceston, as it is all over regional Australia. There's probably never quite been the focus there has been of late. And for an undeveloped piece of land like this one to be available for such a development, it's either going to be this or something very much like this. So I think we have to accept that this is a part of our current Launceston landscape. The indicative plans, you know, if someone was to ask me, do I like them? Not particularly, but do I get to vote on that? No, I don't. That's not how the Planning Authority works. I can only vote on the Heritage Council of Tasmania's indication, as well as our planning officers. So I will be supporting this development application today with some reservations.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Question, Councillor Walker?
Yes. Yeah, a few questions. Thank you, Mayor. I'll start off by asking our planning officers what the timeline is for this approval. Does it, when it says that the deemed
of July,
the deemed approval is the 16th of July, does that mean we have roughly 24 hours in which to make a decision here?
You're right.
That's problematic, and we've been in this situation before. I understand that there's a lot of work that goes into these things, and you know, hence maybe the reason why this is landing on the council table one day before it's deemed necessary to approve it. But when we are in a situation...
Are you speaking or asking a question?
No,
well,
I'm not speaking, but we're in a situation like this. Is there any way that we can extend the process because of the conditions that the Tasmanian Heritage Council are seeking to apply to the amendments that they're seeking to apply?
Richard or Duncan?
The simple answer to that is probably no. I mean, we have a time frame under the Act with which we have to process these things. As you've pointed out, it takes a little bit of work to get it to the council table. The council meets once a fortnight, so the time left over varies depending on, you know, when you apply in relation to council meetings. It's not unusual for us to have to extend the time to the council meeting to allow it to be determined at the council. So that's why a lot of the dates coincide with the council meeting dates, because, you know, sometimes we fall a day or two short, and so we have to extend to the council meeting date. So there is no real opportunity for us to extend the assessment to some uncertain future date.
A further question?
Is it then possible to extend that date with the approval of the applicant, the proponent?
We do request extensions of time from time to time for a particular purpose. So
The applicant could.
The applicant could consent to an extension of time if requested.
Thank you. I thought that was the case.
Another question, or still
more
questions?
questions, please. Thank you, Mayor. So it is possible that we could lay this on the table, depending on that approval. A question about the conditions for the dormer windows and the specifications that are given by the Heritage Council. Do we have any more details on how they would appear at the moment? The fenestrated elevation that's being suggested that they should be made more to have vertical windows, but do we have any representation of how that might appear?
Duncan.
Thank you again. The Heritage Council has required some specific changes, and in the process of that, they provided some guidance notes. We've received a first set of what I've referred to as indicative plans from the designers, saying, this is like the first try at achieving what the Heritage Council might want. But as far as I'm aware, these plans haven't been to the Heritage Council yet. And we certainly haven't heard anything back from them in regard to that acceptance. And so, no, we don't know at this point in time what that change will actually be in the finer detail, but I think we've got a reasonable indication of the direction the change is going.
Thank you. Any further questions, Councillor Walker?
Council has long before I got on council has been working on a height and mass study for the central business district of Launceston, and I'm told that this particular site would be included in that study and any special area precinct that we would create out of that. That process hasn't yet come to fruition. It's taken some time, and so in this case, unfortunately, that wouldn't be able to be applied. But
you got a question, or
setting aside the heritage issues, looking at this purely as a development, how would this development fit in with the proposed special area precinct?
Yeah, Richard?
In the preparation of the special area plan, council officers are working on the guidance that were given to us from the council, which was, I believe, a 14.5 metre high acceptable solution and a 24 metre discretionary. Those figures would apply, and I believe the maximum height of this is, sorry, Duncan, you got that, is less than 14. So on the basis of that, this would comply with the acceptable solution. But as I have pointed out earlier today, the acceptable solutions don't apply to heritage listed sites. And in our upcoming planning scheme, when we move to the Tasmanian planning scheme, the process for determining applications on state listed sites will change, and we will be required, the dual listing that we currently have of local and state listing overlapping each other will go, and things will either be state listed or local listed. If it's state listed, there will be a mandatory referral process, and the ability for the council to consider local heritage will be removed.
CEO wishes to add something to that.
Just to clarify, and I suspect the council is already aware of it, but anything that's not currently within the planning scheme is an irrelevant consideration. So you can't consider what might be a future provision in this planning scheme or the new state provisions. I understand the question, but just understand that it's not a valid consideration for making this decision today.
Thank you. Further question, Councillor Walker?
Thank you, Mayor. Under E13 .6.8, the roof form and materials, the objective is to ensure that roof form and materials are compatible with the historic, cultural, heritage significance of local heritage places and their settings. And our response is that this relies on performance criteria, and it says that our response says that the roof form and materials are compatible with the historic, cultural heritage. So is that suggesting that the fenestration, the pop-top roof, is compatible with the historic, cultural heritage significance of its place and setting?
Richard?
That is the view of Council's Heritage Officer, and which is supported by the planners in the advice.
Thank you. Any further questions?
No further questions.
Do you wish to speak?
I shall reserve my opportunity to speak and would like to move a motion that the council at least explore the idea of seeking a couple of weeks pause in this process until such time as we can get some more detail on the Heritage Council's conditions that they're wishing to place upon the design and the development application.
So that is that it lay on the table, is what you're saying, correct?
Correct.
Yep. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Spencer seconds that. Do we discuss that? Any discussion on that? Deputy Mayor?
I think it's important to understand from a process perspective it would lay on the table until we made contact with the applicant, and then depending on their decision, and given that we don't have a lot for officers really to speak to them about because the motion doesn't say that, then the decision would be made as to either the need to deal with it today or at a subsequent meeting.
I might just also add, Deputy Mayor, that if we're unable to contact the person today, which can't be guaranteed that we can, then we will need to make a decision today. Otherwise, you do open the council up to the potential for a deemed approval. So,
thank you, Councillor McKenzie.
I'm speaking to challenge that concept on the basis that we've got all the information that's been provided. Our Heritage Officer has actually written a report. Tas Heritage Council have written a report and required some changes to be done, which they will oversee those changes, which will then come back for approval by our officers. I'm not sure that laying it on the table, in my view, actually changes anything. From my perspective, the information's there. The Heritage Commission have put their conditions on it. They will be the final arbiter on whether the redesign that comes back from the proponent's architect meet those requirements, and if not, they'll send them back to do it again, I imagine. And then once that approval is received from Heritage Council, our officers will then move to approve it. I'm not sure what role we actually have beyond that.
Thank you, Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor, and I thought as the mover of the motion I should speak to it. And I would beg to differ that there was a lack of detail in moving that motion to lay it on the table. I specifically did say that it would be in order for us to have an opportunity to consider the responses to the amendments that have been suggested by the Heritage Council. That would be the reason, because we're as yet not to know the detail of some of those conditions, and we're not to know the response to that detail. I accept the point that's been made that in essence that would be a process that would be out of our hands if we were to approve this today, What I'm seeking is for a situation where we can have some potential impact, bearing in mind that I haven't yet spoken to this initial application, and I will make some points in regards to that, some of those points being made by some of the speakers, representatives today. But what I'd love to see, of course, and hopefully everyone around this table and the developer included, is a positive outcome. And I think there's many aspects to this development that do indicate that a positive outcome is possible, and yet there seems to be a grey area, question marks around roof forms, dormer forms and the like, as well as potentially materials that are used to finish the building that haven't been answered and may yet not be answered to the satisfaction of this council. So at least seeking this, delay in the process, perhaps revisiting it in 2 weeks' time, it may not prove fruitful, but if it does, it would mean that as a council, we are exploring every opportunity in which to get the best outcome.
Thank you. Councillor Spencer, do you wish to speak to it? No. Councillor Harris?
A question, if I may. To understand how long you expect to lay this on the table, is it to be for one meeting, so 2 weeks? What happens if the applicant and the Heritage Commission haven't concluded their discussions? Are we any further advanced than what we are? And would there be the provision to again lay it on the table, or will we be automatically approving it after that?
No, it'll be lay on the table until we speak to the applicant, and if he says no, that's the end of it. So it's up to him.
Speak now.
You want to speak now? You may.
I just think that whilst it would be nice to have all of the details of a final plan of what we are doing or approving here, what we are entrusting is that the Tasmanian Heritage Commission, who have expertise in this area, will in fact approve a plan that they are happy with. And that can give them as long as necessary, once we have given the approval of this development application, to come up with a satisfactory plan that they are happy with. Whether that takes 2 minutes or 6 months, that's for them to have a final approval on, because only when they are happy will it come back to our council officers to formally issue the development application. So from our point of view, there is very little to be gained by laying it on the table so that we can look at what we might consider as an approved colour scheme or plan or window design, when in fact the Tasmanian Heritage Commission will have the say on that, and that is probably where it rightly lays, seeing how this is a heritage listed property. So
thank you.
I won't be supporting the motion.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Dakey?
Thank you, Mayor. I also won't be supporting the motion. We don't vote on design as much as we'd like to over the years. We just don't get a chance to. It's just not within our power. In this case, the THC do. No, THC. THC. The THC do. They're the experts. They fully control, especially our sensitive areas within the city. And my comments, I think they're small suggestions. They've done a great job with it. The indicative plans we've got, I fully support. So I'll be not supporting your motion.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Do you wish to close, Councillor Walker?
Thank you, Mayor. I will. I appreciate the argument that this is in the hands of the Tasmanian Heritage Council, the THC, and that, but they are primarily, obviously, concerned with heritage conditions and heritage decisions. We also have performance criteria as a council, and we are not yet to know whether those performance criteria are going to be fully met. As I pointed out, for example, the roof form we're suggesting is compatible with the historical cultural heritage significance of the place, and yet I do not see any examples of a fenestrated roof in that area, none whatsoever. So I'm not sure how that is compatible, and I'd of course be interested to see what the Heritage Council response is to that and what they do negotiate. But in the meantime, I would like to reserve our decision, because we are yet to be assured that it does meet those objectives that we have in our own planning scheme. There are others, of course, and that would go to the issues, if I can bear with me for a second, the other issues that we have in our own planning scheme that go to the amenity of the area that the building is assessed to comply with, and just struggling to find that section in the document at the moment, but the height of the bulk of the building being compatible with the historic cultural heritage significance of the place. Now, certainly there are questions that have been asked in that regard, and changes to the design may improve that, but we're yet to know that. So I would encourage councillors to at least attempt this process of seeking further information. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. I'll put the motion for laying it on the table. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Those against? That's lost. So we go back to the original motion. Any other speakers on the motion? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. And I do wish to congratulate the proponent for the efforts and the iterations that they've gone through to reach this point. It's certainly changed somewhat, as far as I'm aware, from its initial iterations, and so we are presented with a development that in many ways is compatible, is in many ways complementary, as, for example, the roof line of the building mirroring the roof line of the existing 3 steps on George building on George Street, funnily enough. But then, of course, in that gabled roof has been put another floor, essentially another layer to the building completely, which changes that roof line. So wherever you see in these documents that this building has somehow mirrored its adjoining neighbour in the street, it's not true. It doesn't mirror that building. It manages, through that fenestration, to completely change the nature of that gabled roof. In essence, you've got another storey on the building with gabled ends. I suppose that would be the best way to describe it. Now, I note that one of the representatives, Dr. Eric Ratcliffe, has provided some, very preliminary sketches with his representation, and it is the sort of thing that would help alleviate that problem and help find a compatible solution both for the developer and for that representation, that the gable roof can be sort of maintained, the dormer windows can be improved or created in this case, and the compatibility would be improved dramatically. I note that Dr. Ratcliffe is not against the footprint or even the height of the building, and he rightly has pointed out some of the things that the Heritage Council have also pointed out, which is to do with the finishing, the colour schemes and the textures that the building initially was seeking to use, which, again, the Heritage Council is addressing, but we're not to know as a council what the outcome of that will be. As I said, the Heritage Council are only dealing with the heritage conditions, and in this case, the heritage fabric of the existing buildings is not being substantially altered or demolished or anything like that. So in some ways, the Heritage Council's job is made a lot simpler, really. But as a council and as a community, we have that responsibility to our heritage and how it's presented, and rightly so, we're very proud of that. And it would be a shame if there were opportunities to keep that presentation at a high level, and we missed that opportunity because we were prepared to accept the second best as far as the development goes. As I say, in a lot of ways this development makes a big effort to acknowledge its surroundings, but on the other side it fails insofar as the way it usurps the visible surrounding area. So, having said all that, I'm reluctant to support this development application while I'm unsure of the outcomes, and while I can see a number of improvements that can and hopefully will be made, and yet I have no assurance that that'll be done to the satisfaction of, well, both myself but also the representatives in the area and people generally in our community that are fierce defenders of our built heritage. And I will take this opportunity to thank those people who've made those representations that, you know, are quite substantial and take a lot of work and a lot of dedication, and they're not to be taken lightly because there's some extremely informed, intelligent, useful suggestions in there, and I would really encourage the developer to take them on board and to see that they could possibly include some of those.
Thank you. Your time's up. Do you need an extension?
No.
Thank you.
I don't think you, Mayor. Some of those suggestions in their design. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Dakin.
Thank you, Mayor. I think everything's nearly been said, but just in summary for myself, I've got a building here, it's in the creek zoning. The height's actually restrained to what it could be. The design, I think we've discussed a lot, it's in the eye of the beholder. I mean, I think the gable roofline looks great, and I actually think it's very sympathetic to the surroundings of the other properties. I sympathise with the residents of George Street. I used to live in 171 George Street for many years. I only had one car park. We had two cars. But I did know that it's across the road from a hospital, there's a hotel, there's commuters that drive to a park there and then walking into their offices and to their work. So that's just a fact of living in the city. It happens in a lot of streets. As I said before about the design and the THC's role in this, and I fully support the development, and I wish the applicants all the very success in their build.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor. One thing, I don't really know what I'm voting for to see what's going to look like. That's what worries me. The Heritage Council will have the final say of what its colours are and whatever. But one thing we do need in this city is more accommodation. And that's what this is going to provide. So it's a hard one for me to not know what it's going to look like. And it'd be good if we could lay it on the table until we got heritage feedback to say this is what it's going to be like. Because if we're voting on something, what's it going to look like? So that's what worries me. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Preece.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that everybody has had some great input to the discussion. I would like to recognise that the amenity of the building is quite substantial, and I sympathise with the people in the area. My concern was with the parking, and again the parking, the lease of the parking long term, but that was well discussed today. I'm thankful that the Heritage Council has indeed had input into the details of the building products. I would personally have liked to have seen a setback in the northern end of the building height, perhaps retaining the gable, but offsetting that corner back towards 3 steps on George. I recognise that we do need more accommodation in our city. I also recognise that we do sit as a planning authority, and it does seem to be that it does indeed meet the planning scheme. So, but I would like to acknowledge and appreciate the people that have come to speak today. of this building that will impact their lives, and I value that it might have that impact. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor. Look, I just wanted to briefly contribute that very often we ask for amended plans to be submitted around this council table when we stand and act as a member of the planning authority. So whilst I certainly appreciate that in this instance there are going to be some modifications that we haven't seen, that is the way the scheme works, and it is the way that we work a variety of times when we sit as a member of a planning authority. We seek and endorse amendments to the plans, and then the plans come back to council officers. In this instance, the amended plans go back and forth, perhaps, a couple of times with the Heritage Council and then get signed off by our council officers. So I just think it's important to understand that this is not a different process. We're not doing something that's out of the ordinary. This is the standard process that is afforded to us and followed many, many council meetings.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks everybody for their input. And again, I'd like to thank the representatives and others that have spoken here today in relation to the matter. Again, we're always challenged when things come to us at this table. That's because not everybody's happy with what we're actually being asked to approve or not approve. So the only time we actually see it is when it's not done under delegated authority, which means we have more than 3 representations, or there are other reasons why it might come to us. So we're here to deal with the difficult issues. What I'm uncertain about is whether we've got the cart and the horse in the same order. We've had representations that have come in. I'm not sure whether the THC have seen the actual representations and therefore help that inform their opinion. But the reality of it is, regardless of that, the Tas Heritage Council have taken the plans that were submitted and looked at it in the context of the heritage matters that need to be discussed and looked at under the Heritage Code. They've come back and they've said there have been some amendments, and when we look at the one, for instance, in regard to the roof form and materials, their recommendation was that the dormer/roof cut-outs of the East George Street and Western elevations should be articulated by omitting or reducing the connecting roof lines. So that's got to come back, and I hope that they saw the drafts that Dr Ratcliffe put in, and maybe that will help inform them on something that will fit better within the streetscape. So I hope that that does get an opportunity for them to look at it in a more broad things. We've seen a potential first cut of what that might look like in the presentation that's in the papers that we've got today. That is not necessarily, and probably won't be, the final output or outcome of that decision. The reality of it is we've got skilled people in the Tas Heritage Council who've looked at it. We've got skilled planning officers who've looked at it in the balance of the planning scheme that we've got. And this is deemed to actually meet and fit the terms of the planning scheme, subject to the amendments that have been approved. And as Councillor Gibson said, the reality of it is that we do this every time this comes in. There are usually amended plans that have to come back in to support things at the end. We have to trust people who actually know more about this than we do. We're here looking at the scheme and trying to understand how the scheme is. We're having not strong representatives, we're actually being strongly advised by our planning officer that this meets the scheme, and therefore that's why I need to support this today.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Those against? That's 2 against, the rest are 4. The motion is carried. We go to 9.2, the Amendment 67. Moved Councillor Harris, seconded Deputy Mayor. Councillor Harris, wish to speak to it?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This is an amendment to allow hospital services to be provided at 243 to 247 Wellington Street and also 237 to 241 Wellington Street. For those listening, that is the Hub Medical Centre opposite the Metro on Wellington Street. The reason for doing so is under the current commercial zoning they can't provide overnight care of any patients, and they wish to actually allow some surgery to have overnight stays, and to do so they need to have hospital added to their particular special area plan for these 2 addresses. So as this whole area is being developed into a health hub with the expected changes to the LGH that might see a new entrance in that general area, along with the proposed new private hospital off Franklin Street, having hospital services in Wellington Street, which would alleviate pressure on the public system because it would allow overnight stays in their private system, seems to be a logical progression for us to approve at this stage. So I do ask all councillors to support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor. I think it's important to note that we're still sitting as a member of a planning authority, not talking about the state of health in Tasmania, but it's important to note as well that at this time the application hasn't been on public exhibition, and as is the case with all amendments, should it be initiated today, then it'll go on a period of public exhibition and then it will come back to us irrespective of how many representations are received. And I think that's the process. It's important, and commend the motion as listed to the table today.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker.
I appreciate the Deputy Mayor's succinct summation of our job here as he just described, but I just would like to note also that this is a changing area in Launceston. It's a busy area, as we all know, and that there is provision for people to obviously have that input and comment once this has been decided. So, but certainly it's a dynamic area, and to see that being used in other areas is something that would be expected for such a busy part of Launceston. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Harris, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. Go to Mayor's announcements. Point number one, I want to mention on Saturday the 10th, I didn't get to the presentation trophies of the first of Launceston's competitions, final competitions. The deputy represented me there, so that can be scrubbed out. That'll be good. And I just want to also mention that it was a pleasure on Wednesday morning to meet with the Consul General of Japan, who's from Melbourne, but he's related to Japan, and he's very keen to continue to work with us. So I'm suggesting with our Economic Development Officer, perhaps CEO, and perhaps sometime we invite him back when he's got more time, and maybe when Festivali's on, and we show him a bit of Launceston and the great bits of Launceston with Festivali at the same time, our product. And so I'll work on that. So I think it was just good to catch up and to hear that he's keen and to see what he can do to promote this area. And he's from Osaka, which is very close to where our sister city is, Ikeda, which a lot of us have been to Osaka, which was great. And the only other one I want to mention was the public citizenship ceremony. Again, Friday the 2nd of June. It was fantastic to be there. Really good to see the smiles on the faces and the excitement of the new citizens and people who... I met one lady there who I've known all her life, and she's been here a long time and she became a citizen, but others just come from many different countries and they just love being part of Australia, and I think it's great. If you've never been to a citizenship ceremony, for those that are listening, please go along to one sometime, and you get to reaffirm your commitment to Australia as well, and I think that's something great that we can do every time. So and that's it from myself. Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. And as you referenced, it was a real pleasure to represent you and Council on Saturday evening, the final evening of the Launceston competitions, of which this council has been a sponsor for a number of years. What was particularly evident was the hard work that had gone into reimagining the competitions at the Princess Theatre. A significant degree of complexity was required in terms of the COVID-safe plan, managing thousands of competitors spread out across 9 days, working in partnership with Public Health and, importantly, the Princess Theatre. And the adjudicator, who came from regional Victoria and was thrilled to be able to be here for this year's festival, this year's competition, referenced the hard-working committee but also the outstanding standard of dancing in northern Tasmania, noting that a number of entries come from right across the state. Also on Saturday, it was a real pleasure, Mr Mayor, and one out of the box for me, but one that I enjoyed, attending the AFL. And indeed to see Fremantle and the Hawks on what Mr Kennett described as the best playing surface in Australia, and asked that CEO pass those comments on to our hard-working staff. It was a great occasion, and most importantly it was great to hear of the passion that Mr Kennett and indeed the board have for an ongoing relationship, whatever that looks like, with Tasmania, but certainly one that recognises and celebrates the 9,000 Hawks members that passionately support AFL and the Hawks in Tasmania. Mayor, I wanted also briefly to reference the launch of the Junction Arts Festival, the 10th anniversary of the Junction Arts Festival, in conjunction with the Australia Artlands Conference, which will be happening in the first week of September. Obviously, this is a very significant event for the city, for the state. It's a cultural event like no other, and one that we support with significant funds from our events sponsorship program. So it was great last Friday, along with yourself and other councillors, to be present for the launch and to see the way that Tasmanian talent is being celebrated and held up in terms of this year's program, and we can't wait for that program to bring significant economic and social and cultural returns to our city at a time where we need it the most.
Thank you. Councillor Soward.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of things. First of all, I reckon on page 67 there's an incorrect date for the citizenship. I wouldn't mind betting that was Friday the 2nd of July, not June. Always happy to help. On a positive note and a suggestion, just to echo the Deputy's comments regarding the AFL game, I did see obviously Councillor Gibson, Councillor Walker, Councillor Dawkins, Councillor Harris, and I'm sure other councillors were there, CEO and a number of council staff were there. Fantastic AFL, and it's not about the game, it's all the other things that go on in the community. But my constructive suggestion is this. Once again, that AFL game has been played on the same day as State League football, as NTFA football, and what I'm getting at is that reduces the impact that such an event can have on our city, because community sport, as we always reference, Mr Mayor, in particular you as a strong leader on this, highlights the importance of community volunteers, the people on the gates, the people that help out with the first aid, running water, providing training services. When an AFL game is held on the same day as those rostered sports matches, that means that hundreds, if not thousands, of people cannot attend. And to my mind, the AFL game was on Saturday. We had, at that exact same time, first place Launceston playing second place Northern Bombers.
May I remind you this is council reports, not on your soapbox time.
Well, with respect, Mr Mayor, I was making a positive suggestion that those games should not be scheduled at the same time. So
we don't schedule the games. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, Mayor. And I'd just like to take a point of a couple of the other items on your list there. One, the NAIDOC flag raising ceremony. I thought that was one of the best ones I've actually attended. And I think healing was the theme for NAIDOC week this year. And I thought it was absolutely fantastic with the way you spoke, the way the Aboriginal leaders spoke, and particularly the way the Premier spoke about how healing can happen. And I think that the steps that are going forward at the moment with the state government may be leading towards a treaty and truth-telling and so forth like that, I think is something really, really positive, and I think maybe a pretty important part of where our future goes in relation to our dealings with our Indigenous people. So I'd just like to highlight that because I think it was fantastic. And the other one, which is the curious one at the bottom, which was the 30th anniversary of St Kilda supporters, which we attended last night with Councillor Harris, which sounds a peculiar thing for us to be celebrating here. But I didn't understand the reason that they're there is they actually support more than the St Kilda. They support a lot of activities in and around Launceston and in Tasmania by their charitable work, and I think therefore make them a laudable group to actually support and have a civic function for, because they've been raising money for the last 30 years for lots of charities in and around Launceston. I think they're hosting the winter in Christmas in winter at the Boathouse, I think on the 31st of July, I think from memory, Mayor. So they're actually supporting that to try and help some of our people less fortunate in our community. So that's the reason why we support that. As I say, on the first blush, you'd say, why would we be doing this? But having gone there and listened to the Mayor and listening to the President of that supporter group, apart from my, my bias towards the Hawthorn Football Club, and it is all about the result, Councillor Soward. I thought it was fantastic and what they actually do within our community. So just because you have an allegiance to a sporting club doesn't mean you're actually not doing other great things within the community, and I think they certainly prove with what they do.
Thank you. Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you, Mayor. Along with Councillor Gibson, I attended the opening of the Jam Factory touring exhibition, Concrete Art, Design Architecture at Design Tas. It was a really interesting exhibition. There were miniatures of places of worship, there were object art, there were all sorts of practical applications for concrete. But what was so thrilling about it was that Brian Parks, the CEO of Jam Factory, went to Launceston College. So he is one of Tasmania's sons made good. He's very highly esteemed within the design industry, and the exhibition is in fact on until September, 25th of September, so please get along, support Design Tas. We always need your support. I'd just like to also mention that Design Tas has been through difficulties, as you all know, but it's really coming together brilliantly, and I'd like to pay tribute to the board who've worked so hard to ensure that that's so.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor. Unfortunately, a few others have stolen what I was going to talk about, but I will just say that I attended the public citizenship ceremony and have done on a number of occasions, and as you say, it always makes you feel proud to be Australian when you see these number of people who come and then choose Australia rather than those of us who were born here and we had no choice in the matter. Mind you, I'm very happy about that. As far as the NAIDOC flag raising goes, it's my first opportunity to attend one of those, and I found it very uplifting. I think the Premier spoke very well, and I'm sure that those in the Aboriginal community who were there would have felt uplifted by what he had to say as well. And in fact, it so inspired me that I had conversations with Graham Gardner, the chairman, and through Rotary we may actually find ways to help spread the word of the truth-telling and such things in the earlier part of next year. So you'll all have to stay tuned for that one. But also the St Kilda supporters, yes, they do more than support a great club that's only managed to win one premiership in about 150 years. I guess we're always the eternal optimists, but they also help many, many charities, and including the Benevolent Society, which is the charity who the dinner is for. And if anyone wanted to make a donation towards that but they weren't able to attend, they have a novel idea that you can buy a plate for $25, and that can actually be passed on to the Benevolent Society. And if you want to spend a bit more, $80 will feed a family for a week as well out of the Benevolent Society. So a quick plug for Rod Spinks and his crew there. But it was good to see probably a good 60 or 70 St Kilda supporters who were there on the night, and certainly I was proud to be amongst them as well. My wife wondered why I was so late at getting home. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other reports? Councillor Walker.
Well, at the risk of reiteration, I did also attend the, well, apart from attending the Hawks game on Saturday, the flag raising during NAIDOC week, such an important time of the year for our Aboriginal community. You know, there was a time when I used to get invited to speak at these things, but now getting sort of, bumped by the Premier is not a bad thing. And certainly listening to our Mayor speak and our Premier speak at such an event was extremely significant for me personally to see the level of interest, the commitment that has been made by this council and by this state government. And, long may it continue. And it is a long road that we're on. And I just, wish all the best in that process, that we take steps carefully, but, also boldly, that we take steps forward in regards to reconciling ourselves through truth-telling, and certainly through listening to our Indigenous voices. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other reports? No, we'll go on to questions on notice, which there are none. Questions without notice. Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you. Can I confirm that City of Launceston's officers are following the rollout of the City of Hobart's bylaw banning single-use food packaging in order to form an opinion on City of Launceston doing the same at some point in the future?
We work quite closely with the City of Hobart waste management officers. As you're aware, the state government are introducing a waste levy and a strategy, and through our role in that, we're continuing to push that it is a statewide issue also. Happy to, what I'll do is extend an invite to City of Hobart officers to come and talk to us about their journey on the ban of single-use plastic.
Thank you. One question, no more? Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor. I've got an email from a gentleman about the grants. Just want to know how many acquittals are still outstanding from the council grants?
CEO, maybe?
Look, I haven't got the information to hand, having not been given any prior notice of the question, so I can confirm that and give you the information. Yes.
Now, is it possible for people that haven't set their acquittals in that we black ban them for future grants? I don't think it's fair. They were supposed to send them in. My second question is QV Mag and our swimming centre. People that don't live in Launceston, can they be charged extra money, like $1 per head, to go to our facilities?
Well, that would be an issue for councillors to make a policy on. So if you want to bring a notice of motion, that would be...
I think we need to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Someone happy to move that? Deputy Mayor, seconded. Councillor Walker. Do you wish to speak to it, Deputy? Councillor Walker? No. Yep. Yes? No. Anyone wish to comment? Speak. Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you. I just want to speak to BitLink's presentation. What a fantastic thing it was to see how the Internet of Things, the simple applications, and how our school students are enabled to learn what they're going to need to learn for the future through a project like this. So really impressed.
I was impressed, but it was over my head.
Didn't understand it, but still impressed.
Any other one on this council workshops? Can I put the motion then? Those in favour? That's all councillors present. That is carried. Move on to, if I got it correctly, 19.1, flying of the flags. Deputy Mayor. Seconded, Councillor Walker. Do you wish to speak to it, Deputy?
Just briefly, Mayor, and in doing so I want to say, alongside others who attended, it was a pleasure to attend the flag raising, the City of Launceston's flag raising at the Aboriginal Centre last week. And in moving this, I want to say thank you to some of my council colleagues who continue to lift our minds and lift our heads to what reconciliation and what a future that is reconciled can be. That is appreciated and valued, as is the case from other members of our community. Mayor, I believe our council and our community of Launceston are actively working towards equity and accessibility and, importantly, reconciliation with and for our First Nations people, as well as other marginalised groups within our community. I want everyone to feel welcome and proud to be part of our community, and I personally commit to advancing these principles today and every day, and I encourage our community at large to do the same. It is therefore why I wanted to move this motion and commend it to the table, and I also, in doing so, apologise for how long it has taken. But I believe that we as a council can purposefully and intentionally uplift the minority and historically marginalised groups within our community. And that's the Launceston that I stand for, and in doing so suggest that the Flying of Flags policy review is overdue and committed to the table.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. And it is, I suppose, coincidence that this has come to our table the week after NAIDOC week, where there is the traditional raising of the Aboriginal flag at the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre. I never knew how complicated flag flying policies were, to be honest, and looking at this excellent document that is prepared by Elizabeth Clark, I'm sure with the help of others, perhaps, I don't know, but I thank you very much for the work that you've done. the protocols involved are really quite specific. You would think it's always a simple matter to fly a flag, but no, apparently not. But I'm extremely proud that this council is taking this step forward, as I said to the earlier item, taking steps forward surely but boldly. This is one step in a process. This process, as far as I can see, is an ongoing one. It's not one where there is an end destination. It's a continual journey that we walk together with the Tasmanian Aboriginal community to continue to develop cultural relationships and understanding and to recognise past injustices that certainly can't be changed, but we can change the present and make a better future for all of us. This policy will mean that we fly the Aboriginal flag at this building, the City Town Hall, as well as at the Albert Hall, and has to be remembered that Council has regularly flown the Aboriginal flag, but doing it on a permanent basis sends a strong message to our community, and especially the Aboriginal members of our community, that we certainly mean what we say in terms of seeking to have just reconciliation over time and to continue that journey and that conversation in a respectful way. So I certainly commend the motion to the table.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, Mayor, and I think that it's a great thing that we've got this here today. I mean, it's largely symbolic to acknowledge that the Aboriginal people are very much part of our thinking and the things that we do all the time. And I personally like to commend Councillor Walker on bringing a lot of the issues to this table when he joined this council, and I think that certainly you've been very instrumental in a lot of the things that we're doing better than we were. So I'd like just to acknowledge that work. And it's now in the doing. It's not about, flying flags is important, but the actual how we actually get down to the truth telling and actually involving our Aboriginal people in our community more and making them feel part of what we are, and something that I probably didn't fully appreciate and have only started to appreciate over the last number of years, that because I tend to think of everybody as just being people, and I understand through a number of the things that we've talked about at this council table and outside of it, that there are lots of things that haven't been done well over many years. So I'm extremely proud that we're actually moving this forward, and I read the article that Michael Mansell commented on a few days ago, saying that the importance of it being in NAIDOC week is not so important. The fact that we're doing it is the important thing. So whilst these things do take some time through our processes, we've got there now, so let's move on and do it. And I look forward to moving forward and improving our relationships further.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Deputy, if you can have the chair. I certainly support what's been said, but I want to point out it's more than just about the Aboriginal community, just so people are aware of that out there that are listening. This flags policy is really about when do we fly it at half-mast. So we've got to be careful if something comes up and said you didn't do it when so-and-so, but this is what we're going to be doing in the past with previous mayors, councillors, former aldermen, former councillors, and as approved by the mayor, but also about the locations, and it's not just here or the Albert Hall, which is important, but it's other locations we have already around the city with flags that are flown, and it's important to recognise that we do that. We are doing that consistently. Royal Park, we always have the flags there, and we have it down at Home Point as well. So it's the whole policy of flags for this council. I want to make sure that we all understand that, and that's what we're voting on, so that we can appreciate when something comes up, it's got to fit in with this flags policy. Because I was asked on the radio when I was interviewed just recently, have I got, what was the word they used? Veto power or something, I think, on what could I do? And I said, no, I haven't. We've got to work within the policies of what council has. So that's why it's here. Thank you. Back to me, Deputy. Thank you. And Deputy Mayor, you wish to close?
Just briefly, and you did touch on it, Mayor, importantly, on page 76, the changes to the policy are listed, and we note in the narrative that now the DAs will be lodged that will see the additional flag poles place on the top of this building and Albert Hall, and a summary of the changes, particularly the changes with regard to the stadium and what has necessitated those changes there. As I think has been referenced around the table, this is about the flying of flags and multiple flags, but importantly, for the first time ever, it's about flying the Aboriginal flag on 2 prominent council buildings every day, as per the policy. How exciting that is, and what a time for this council, hopefully, to get behind this unanimously.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. That is all councillors present. That is carried. 19.2, Fees and Charges Amendment. Is someone happy to move that? Councillor Harris. Councillor McKenzie seconded. Wish to speak to it, Councillor Harris?
Only that these are some minor amendments to fees and charges. First of all, at the Car Villa, where we've now created a new Garden of Memories to enable placement of ashes, and the suggested pricing as was reflected to us in a workshop. And also some very minor changes just at the Launceston Aquatic Centre, where the LA Fit concessional membership and the off-peak membership had very slight increases of 90 cents per fortnight. So they're just some minor changes, but mainly because of the new Car Villa ash placement garden that has been established and needed some fees to be set. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McKenzie. Any other councillor wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. That is all councillors present. That is carried. 19.3, lead. Someone happy to move that? Councillor McKenzie. Seconded, Councillor Harris. Councillor McKenzie, wish to speak to it?
I'd just say it's in accordance with our ongoing policy of reviewing our leases, but I'd like to acknowledge Mr Leone, who sent who sent through the photos of what they're actually doing on our leased land, and clearly they're treating it as their own and have developed that space significantly out there. So I think it's fantastic when people take on board a lease like that, but actually look after it like it's their own. So I'm certainly in favour of extending that lease.
Thank you. Councillor Harris. Any other councillor wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 20.1, outcome local government TAS elections. Somebody happy to move? Councillor Spencer moved, seconded. Councillor McKenzie. You wish to speak to it, Councillor Spencer? Councillor McKenzie? Any other councillor wish to speak to it? Deputy Mayor, perhaps? No. I'll put the motion. Those in favour? That is all councillors present. That is carried. Now can we have a motion that we go into closed council? Moved Councillor Harris, seconded Councillor Dakin. All those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. Thank you. We'll go into closed council. So we're not on yet. Wait a minute. No, I've got a message from the back. Yep, we're on back on earth. So we go back into open council. Can we have a motion? Councillor McKenzie moved. Have we got the wording there? The pursuant to the Act that we close minutes and the lease. Moved Councillor McKenzie, seconded Councillor Harris. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That is all councillors present. We'll close the meeting. Thank you.